Welcome to the Earning Freedom Podcast. I am Michael Santos with michaelsantos.com and prisonprofessor.com. I'm really excited to be continuing this episode of Success After Prison. This, again, is the audio version of our book, Success After Prison, How I Built Assets Worth $1 Million Within 2 years of release from 26 years inside, and how you can succeed too. For those who are new to the program, this is specifically I designed for people who are going through struggle or challenges. A lot of my audience are members who are individuals who are incarcerated. I have a special affinity for people who are in struggle, for people who are incarcerated, because I made some really bad decisions when I was 20 years old, and those decisions resulted in me going to prison for 26 years. However, the decisions that I made while I was inside there resulted in me succeeding beyond anybody's expectations while I was in prison, and more importantly, when I got back. Because as I show you, within 2 years of coming out, 2.5 years out, I'm controlling more than $1 million worth of assets. And I want to show people why the decisions that they make while they're incarcerated, while they're in struggle, while they're in difficulties, those are the decisions that feel a lot like the seeds that we sow for a better outcome. And if you want to have a better outcome in your life, the time to begin is right now. The time to begin is right now. In the earlier episodes, I recorded these, just so you know, in about 20-minute segments. And my earlier segments of Success After Prison podcast, which is also available on Earning Freedom, I tell this whole story of what brought me into prison and what adjustments I made while I was incarcerated. And if you didn't listen to those, if you don't have those, it's really simple to get them. Just visit michaelsantos.com, look at me on YouTube, iTunes, on all the different metrics. I'm all over the social media, and I'd love for you to follow along this story, because I think you might find some hope in it. But if you don't want to do all that, you may just want a digital download, you want a copy of the book, hey, no problem. I'm more than happy to provide one free of charge. Just visit michaelsantos.com. Yeah, there'll be a pop-up menu that asks you to enter your best email address, and automatically a digital version will be sent to you. If you want the paperback copy, however, there are some costs associated with me producing that, and it passes along by selling the books. You can order them from michaelsantos.com or directly from amazon.com if that's easier for you. I think that what I hope that you'll see is that I give away a lot more content than I sell, and the reason is because I want to earn your trust. I want to prove worthy of the time that you are giving to me. I consider it a great privilege that you're listening to me. I know that there's an abundance. There's a lot of places out there you can be getting content, and I'm just a guy who went through prison for 26 years, came back successfully, and I'm trying to share those strategies with as many people as I can. I think it's a human message. I firmly believe that all of us as human beings, we go through struggle, we go through challenges at one time or another in our life, and the choices we make while we're in that struggle really make a difference in whether we're going to succeed or not. The last episode, I was speaking about how, despite doing 26 years in prison, actually at the time I was only 25 because I was still in the halfway house, but despite being in my 26th year of confinement, despite having a 000 credit score, despite having not much in the way of income, I was able to use creative methods to purchase my first piece of real estate, which had a significant influence on the assets that I now control. And we're going to be talking about that. But I also want you to know that was just part of the strategy. So buying that first house was part of the approach that got me on the path to controlling my first $1 million worth of assets. Other parts were launching, or rather solidifying, my income opportunities. And that's what I'm going to be talking about as I continue reading from Success After Prison. So earlier, let me just go on. Earlier, I wrote about rules in the halfway house that required me to have a job. So long as I had a job that paid a steady paycheck, my case manager, Charles, from the halfway house, authorized me to leave. So my friend Lee was more like a sponsor to me than an employer. I mean, he set a schedule for me to work 10-hour shifts Monday through Saturday because I asked him to. And I reported to an office and sat at a desk. But instead of just doing work for Lee, I focused on creating my business. Now, it's a business that I started many, many years before, but I had to bring it into terms with society and not just the work that I created in prison. And first, what I needed was I needed Lee to see the vision. So I persuaded Lee that our nation's commitment to mass incarceration was one of the greatest social injustices of our time. And I believe that. I really believe that we can do better as a nation. But although it would take time, I convinced him. He wasn't all for, me getting behind the whole prison reform movement. And I told him it's going to take time, but I convinced him that a need existed for programs and services to help people emerge from prison successfully. And so he encouraged me to go ahead and develop a plan that's going to lead to a sustainable business, providing products and services that are going to improve those outcomes. So he encouraged me, and I decided, okay, I'm going to go for it. And I'm here telling you the story because all of this related to my growth. It's all part of executing a plan. The first thing that I had to do was learn how to use technology effectively. I mean, the world had changed enormously during the decades that I served. I went to a prison at a time when Bill Gates was talking about, having a computer in every home and on every desk. But when I returned to society, his vision had become a reality. We didn't only have computers in every home and on every desk, but also in everyone's pockets. I mean, since I've been away during the hyper-growth era of technology, I had to learn how to use computers and the internet effectively. Everybody's got one of these cell phones, and they all have access to the internet. So they're all really smart. And that I had to learn how to use all of that because it was all new to me. But although most people use personal computers powered by Microsoft operating systems, I'd read that Apple products were easier to learn. I think at the beginning of this book, I told you I was writing it on an Apple Mac Pro. So I had to learn all of that on the Saturday after I transitioned into the halfway house, that same Saturday where my wife took me to the Westfield Mall. We also visited an Apple store. Actually, my wife visited the store with my sister because I was still in the halfway house and waiting to get to the mall. And they purchased my first Apple computer. It was a MacBook Pro, 27-inch iMac, and also a 27-inch iMac desktop computer, which is currently at my home. And we knew that technology could help me reach a wider audience. And so I had to spend those first weeks in society learning how to use those fascinating tools. Because while I was in prison, I didn't have much access to computers. Now, I read a lot of books about the development of the internet, about search engines, about social media and software applications. But when I began working with computers, I realized that I'd need to invest hundreds of hours, maybe thousands of hours to become proficient. Fortunately, I had Carol to tutor me, but when she wasn't at the hospital, she would sit at a desk right next to me, and she'd work on her studies, and I would be working on the development of my courses. And I liked having her close by because she was always willing to assist me when I had questions about how to use email effectively or how to store things effectively. And there's a lot of things that I wish that I would have done differently now, and that I've been out for 2.5 years. But for example, when I was in prison, one of the things that I did all the way through the journey was I may have written about this. You know what? Let me read the next section because I don't want to say it twice. I began learning about WordPress, the powerful platform for building websites. And when Carol first came into my life, we purchased the domain name michaelsantos.net because the .com name wasn't available. I mentioned that earlier. But Carol then retained a web developer to build our new website, and then I would publish thousands of articles to document progress I was making through my final decade in prison. And toward the end of my journey, we were able to purchase the domain name michaelsantos.com, and we began making the transition from michaelsantos.net to michaelsantos.com. Now, when I got out, I wanted to have this central location that would demonstrate my authenticity. I didn't want to be, and there's a lot of guys that, and I don't, there's a lot of guys who do a little bit of time and they fancy themselves experts on the system. I had documented my entire journey through 26 years. And since Carol was busy with her career and her schoolwork, I wanted to educate myself quickly on how I could use WordPress so that I could manage my own websites, because she'd published all of that information on my websites. But I made some critical errors in the beginning. By switching hosting companies once and redesigning michaelsantos.com, I lost thousands of articles and journal entries that I'd made over the years. For decades, I wrote a daily journal entry and sent those journal entries home. Carol published each entry as my daily log on the website because I wanted people to see the path that through hard work, an individual could triumph over prison. But unfortunately, I lost all of those records with my decision to switch from one web hosting company to another foolishly, and I paid a heavy price for my inexperience. But in time, I became more fluent with WordPress and with social media, and that really helped me. So my lesson here for you is if you are on a path to preparing yourself for success, don't just leave it in a vacuum and a void. Use all of your efforts to prepare for success. Document them to the extent that's possible. All I had was a good old ballpoint pen and a piece of paper. That's all I had when I was inside because I didn't have access to core links until the very end of my sentence. But that didn't stop me from writing a daily journal. And I would record such things as, well, first of all, in the beginning of the year, I would write what I was going to accomplish, how many books I was going to read, how many miles I was going to run, what my goals were going to be, how many, just everything. I just wrote. I don't remember now. It's been 2.5 years. But I used to, January 1st come out, I'd list a publication and I'd say this is what I'm going to do by the end of the year, and then every day I would document the journey, and that really helped keep me on track. I'd always exceed my goals because I was journaling, and that's what I would encourage you to do. But don't only just journal for yourself. Use these tools that you have available. Send the web is out here right now, and build a support network. Write out your goals. Write out your activity logs. Send them to people or email them if you're in an institution that has core links or has an email functionality so that you can document the record because it becomes incredibly valuable when you come back to society. At least it was incredibly valuable for me. I mean, it's part of the reason I was able to use creative financing and get a what do you call it? What was I going to say? A loan to buy my first house. So this is important. Document your journey. That becomes your credit. So after making that fatal flaw in designing my websites, I knew that I had to learn more, and because although I didn't understand much about using technology or computer networks, my adjustment through prison gave me other skills. Okay, I had to focus on what I could do, not what I couldn't. And one prong of my adjustment strategy was building support networks. Because if I could build strong support networks, I believed more opportunities would open in prison and upon release. So the goal of building strong support networks influenced my Socratic questioning. What steps can I take today to influence people to believe in me tomorrow? How about you? Are you asking that kind of question? What you can do today to influence people tomorrow, or next week, or next month, or next year, or in 5 years? You see, when you're thinking that way, that's what's driving, that's what's going to further your drive. That's what's going to further your passion. That's what's going to keep you going, keep you growing, so that you're not waiting just for calendar pages to turn. You're making a difference in your own life. And so those types of questions, they influenced my adjustment. And the accomplishment I made while I was inside persuaded other people to believe in me. And I could leverage those relationships to open new relationships. And I'm going to give you some examples. Earlier I wrote about my friendship with Justin Paperny. Justin, he was a graduate from the University of Southern California. He had built a career as a stockbroker. And although he made some bad decisions that resulted in his going to prison for securities fraud, his crime didn't characterize his entire life. He'd been successful in society once, and as we built our friendship, I sensed that he'd be successful again. So when Justin concluded his obligation to the Bureau of Prisons, that's when he launched the Michael G. Santos Foundation, and he invested time to build that nonprofit. But he also attended schools, workshops, and conferences that exposed him to problems people in underserved communities were facing. And by relaying those findings to me, I had information that I could use in ways that would help us contribute solutions. And through our work, we were able to meet new people, and those new people introduced other people. He met new people, he introduced them to me. And so while I was in prison, I was building my support network. Scott Budnick, for example, was one of the people that Justin brought into my support network. Now, Scott is famous. He's famous for a lot of reasons, but there's nobody who's listening to this episode that won't know some of his work. He was a Hollywood producer that brought blockbuster films like the Hangover series, which I think is one of the highest grossing comedies in Hollywood history. He brought those to market. He brought Starsky and Hutch. He was the producer of many big budget films. And Scott's passion, however, isn't only entertaining people with his Hollywood films, but it's also in juvenile justice. And he founded the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, a nonprofit that strives to reduce recidivism. So, it's pretty awesome. When I returned to society, one of the first phone calls I received was from Scott. He invited me to come down to Hollywood and visit him, but I was still in the halfway house, and rules of the halfway house, they would block me from being able to travel to a different judicial district down in Southern California, where I am now. But after I concluded my obligation to the BOP, I could only go from the halfway house to my place of employment. So those travel limitations and halfway house restrictions were a problem. But human support networks were a solution. And Scott said, and since I lived in San Francisco, I had to meet Chris Redlitz. And so Scott wrote an introductory email to Chris, and I followed up by writing Chris about my background, telling him about my vision of building a business around my journey, telling him about my vision of wanting to teach other people how to emerge from prison successfully. And Chris responded within hours and invited me to meet him. So it turns out that Chris Redlitz is also a very powerful and influential, mover and shaker from the San Francisco Bay Area, just like Scott is a powerful mover and shaker from Hollywood, but really all over the country. And anyway, Scott, he's a professional. He is a venture capitalist. A venture capitalist, for those of you who don't know, puts money together and funds corporations. He ran a company called Transmedia Capital, and also at the time he was running a Silicon Valley accelerator. I think it was called, what was the name of that? I went to visit him a couple times there, but the name, Kickstarter. So a lot of technology companies were based out of there, right in the heart of the San Francisco financial district. And he and his partners, they just matched investors with technology entrepreneurs, and they helped them build compelling business models that would change the world. But in addition to providing that type of funding, Chris, who's also on the podcast that I do on the CD, he tells his own story. He started this company that really helped people in prison transform their life. So he had a passion for improving outcomes of the nation's prison system. And when not putting multi-million-dollar investments together, he and his wife, Beverly, volunteered at the San Quentin State Prison. And initially he went in just to give a speech to the men in prison, but he felt so motivated and inspired by those men in prison that they decided to start The Last Mile. And it was an organization that invests in human beings, people in prison. And they created this comprehensive curriculum that would teach business principles to people in prison. And he'd bring other CEOs and business leaders into San Quentin so that these business leaders would show people in prison how to prepare for success. So I'm coming to the end of this episode here, so I'm going to have to follow up tomorrow a little bit more on The Last Mile and how that relationship and building networks had a direct influence on my being able to build assets that are now worth more than $1 million. But it's what's most important for you to see is to connect the dots here. It was my adjustment early on in prison that positioned me to be able to develop writing skills, publish books, build a support network, get people like Justin to want to partner with me, and then together use our, I'd mentioned before that teamwork is really important. And then Justin and I are working together as a team. We're able to launch this nonprofit foundation when I was still in prison. And we were able to persuade the California Wellness Foundation to see our vision of the role that formerly incarcerated people could have in transforming society and transforming, helping more people emerge successfully and having them fund us. And then by funding us, Justin being able to earn a salary while he was outside and connecting with other, nonprofits in the community. And then he met Scott, and then Scott met me, and then I met Chris. You see, all of this is a chain. But as I said from the beginning, it's the decisions that we make in struggle that position us for success. And that's what I hope that you are seeing through this message, whether it's through the Earning Freedom Mastermind course or through the Earning Freedom Mastermind library, where I'm featuring these stories on CDs, or maybe by me reading this book to you. Whoever I'm communicating with, I want you to know there's a path to a better life. And if you're happy, maybe you don't need that path. But there are so many people who are living in struggle in society, so many people living in prison, that I really feel compelled to want to share what worked for me. Again, they're not messages that I developed. These are messages that I got from the masterminds. Masterminds like Chris Redlitz, Scott Budnick, Justin Paperny, Socrates, Jesus, Muhammad, Gandhi, Viktor Frankl. I mean, there are so many, right? There are so many people who've gone through challenging times, but there are so few people who know how to navigate their way through that adversity and emerge successfully. That's what Earning Freedom is about. That's what Success After Prison is about. Success after prison really begins with the decisions you make while you're in prison. I'm Michael Santos with michaelsantos.com, and I'll be back tomorrow with another episode continuing the story of Chris Redlitz and building my human support network and showing how that had a direct relationship on me becoming successful. If you want earlier episodes, again, just visit my social media sites. Please rate and review my shows. Subscribe to them, whether it's on YouTube or iTunes or Facebook or wherever. And if you want a digital copy, just join the email list at michaelsantos.com, and you'll get one today for free. Thank you very much. I am Michael with michaelsantos.com and Success After Prison. Thanks. Bye-bye.